Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Getting a bit fed up of saying this to them, but they really do now need to listen and make real changes and end the London-centric Labour Party that I have been in all my life.
That's the Greater Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham with some choice words for the Labour leadership back in 2021. 3 years later, how does he feel now?
Hello, you're listening to Bloomberg UK Politics. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. So he's been dubbed the King of the North by the media. Andy Burnham recently reclaiming that crown by coming in the fastest of the Northern mayors who ran the Great North Run most recently, just last weekend. But this is an interesting time to be a Labour mayor of a big metropolitan area. He's had plenty of words in opposition to the government in Westminster when it was run by the Tories. But now he's got Labour in charge.
Yeah, and those 12 regional mayors, of course, were invited to number 10 after the landslide win by Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves and the team. And so they have been put really at the heart of government. The talk is of a kind of better relationship and more benefits from devolution. So it'll be interesting now, though, when the more contentious issues arise, ones that will affect these leaders in their various constituencies.
And of course, we saw one of those issues play out in Parliament last night. So the vote did pass to implement the cuts to the winter fuel allowance, but dozens of Labour MPs abstained from the motion. One voted against. This could be setting up for an interesting set of discussions with those group of regional mayors around the country as we look ahead to the budget at the end of October as well.
Well, joining us now is one of the most high-profile politicians in that group of regional mayors, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, also, of course, a critic of the changes to the winter fuel payment. Just want to start by thinking about this new Labour government. It is still fairly new, 2 months since Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves entered Downing Street. Already we've had some very big challenges, thinking the summer riots, the public sector pay deals, early prisoner releases. So firstly, I'd be interested in how you rate so far Keir Starmer's performance.
I can't remember a more difficult inheritance for any government in my lifetime. The country has felt pretty broken in recent years. So given that, I think what they've achieved so far is very impressive. They are managing to get into the heart of some of these really challenging things that they face, as well as bringing forward big reforms, particularly on the railways, which are well overdue. So in the circumstances that they're facing, I think they've made a really impressive start, and obviously had to deal with all of the challenges we saw with the riots in the summer. So a tough inheritance. I always predicted there would be no honeymoon, and there hasn't been, but they've kind of got stuck straight into the business of government. And I think from day one, Keir Starmer has looked like a prime minister.
One of the first challenges, though, that we saw was last night, dozens of Labour MPs deciding to abstain from a vote over cuts to the winter fuel allowance. You must be disappointed by the government's decision to means test that for millions of pensioners.
I think there is a case for reform of the winter fuel allowance, because it certainly was put to me when I was in the Treasury, and that was over 10 years ago. In that, why do we give a universal benefit? People who are, let's say, pretty wealthy also get the benefit from. So there's the kind of case for some reform to it has been there. What I have said, though, on the record is that the threshold by which people can still claim it, pensions can still claim it, is I would say is too low. That's the pension threshold credit in terms of the amount of money people have and the savings that people have. And what we also find here in Greater Manchester is there's a reluctance amongst pensioners to actually claim it. And despite many take-up campaigns over the years, we just haven't been able to move that number up to where we would want it to be. So the point I made yesterday is, while I can see the case for reform, I think the threshold is too low. And I think there's also perhaps a case for a taper or some other way of reforming winter fuel allowance. And all governments, I think, should keep those matters under review.
Yeah, that doesn't look like that's what's going to happen, hence all of those MPs who abstain. Do you support them for abstaining? I mean, you made those comments around what you wanted to see from the winter fuel allowance. You made them publicly. And, I wonder whether you support those MPs who had those concerns around the government's moves.
I guess what I would say is I sympathise with them, and also with MPs who in the end felt they should be, following what the government was asking for. Indeed, I guess I could say I sympathise with everybody in this situation, including ministers, because the inheritance that they've got to deal with is, as I say, it's probably the worst one ever. And there aren't going to be many easy decisions around, and they're going to have to do more of this. And the parliamentary whip system creates this quite binary situation where people with concerns, and as people will have concerns, either have to sort of make that sort of binary choice of whether they vote for or abstain or vote against. I've called for the reform of the parliamentary whip system because I think it kind of, in some ways, doesn't help a considered discussion about.
But you must be frustrated that in one of these early important decisions by the government, that the government has decided to stick to what is considered quite a harsh line. It's going to affect more than 11 million pensioners, and people within the party have been calling on, some moderation or some recalibration of how many people it's going to affect. I mean, it's an early test for Keir Starmer, for the Labour Party in government. Are you concerned?
Well, it certainly is an early test that they've got to get a grip on the finances, and they would say they're rising to that test. I've put on the table my concerns because I've said that our experience here in Greater Manchester is that relying on pension credit potentially will mean that we won't get the help to the pensioners that we want to help. And the government wants to help because the government is saying it wants to increase the take-up of pension credit so that more people can get the winter fuel allowance this winter. But our experience is that won't happen because there is just this difficulty in those take-up campaigns. So what I would say, and this learns from my time in the Brown and the Blair governments, you've just got to be a kind of listening government and kind of hear what's being said. There's an opportunity coming up with the budget. I would encourage them to consider that opportunity to see if there are some mitigations that can be put in place to ensure that pensioners who do need that funding, who perhaps aren't going to go down the pension credit route, do still get help this winter.
We've been warned of the painful decisions to come in that budget. I wonder how concerned are you about decisions, perhaps spending cuts or tax rises that are going to affect people in Manchester?
Well, it is a very difficult inheritance. I keep making that point, but it's true. But I also see opportunities because, if we are to help the government become a government that is bringing growth to all parts of the country, I think there's plenty for the government to take from Greater Manchester. We've been growing faster than the UK economy in recent years, and we're predicted to continue to do so. And I would encourage the government in making these tough spending decisions, as they no doubt have to do, just being clear about what are the things that bring the growth that they need. And it's so, in making those tough choices, being clear about prioritising the sort of pro-growth investments, particularly public transport, where we have a huge reform programme underway with the creation of the B network. That has been at the foundation of our successes in building a growing city region. So, these are tough judgments coming, no doubt about it. But we will help the government through. And just one final point to make on this: we are moving to a new funding arrangement with the government at the next budget, where Greater Manchester will become the first place in the country to have what we call an integrated settlement. So it'll be more like Scotland and Wales, where there's a sort of more of a block approach to funding. I'm saying to the government, the more that you route through that integrated settlement, the stronger your ability to get more value for public money. Because when you kind of give money to an organisation like the one I lead, we can join the dots between, housing and skills and work and transport, and you actually make that public money go further. So, in difficult circumstances, devolution is providing an answer. And I'm encouraging the new Chancellor. We've submitted our spending plans to her yesterday. The big theme of our spending proposals is the more you route through that integrated settlement at a devolved level, the more we will be able to break down the Whitehall silos and get much more value for public money.
Yeah, which is a big sort of commitment, isn't it, on the part of Greater Manchester, that kind of equation that you're laying out. Look, the government and the Labour government made this quite a big show of inviting all the 12 regional mayors, including you, to Number 10, and Starmer promised these regular meetings. You talked there a little bit earlier about a listening government. This has to be a listening government. The promise of regular meetings, how has that gone forwards? How often is regular? What is the frequency and the format? I mean, you made the public comments around the winter fuel allowance. I mean, the government chose a different direction. What is the format now for this dialogue between the regional mayors?
The dialogue is excellent. So I'll be welcoming Georgia Gould to Greater Manchester later today, who's the Minister for Public Service Reform. And that goes back to exactly what I was talking about a moment ago, about how we do change the way public funding and public services work to get much more value for money. So for instance, we're bidding to have the employment support budget come through us rather than be spent via large corporate entities who often don't help people back into work. We believe if we put that money through our local community and voluntary organisations in a reformed model, we've got the evidence to say that will help us get more money, more people back to work and save more public money. I've been in discussions this morning with the Secretary of State for Transport. So the engagement is great, to be honest. And in difficult circumstances, it has to be, doesn't it? You've got to sort of work through these issues together. They are difficult. But as I said before, devolution is increasingly providing a solution. And this government inherits a different landscape to any before it, where, if you take the north of England, almost 90% of the north of England now is covered by an entity with a devolution settlement. And that gives them an opportunity to address these issues in a different way.
How much do you want in that budget? I mean, Scotland's block grant is around 41 billion a year. Do you want that much?
If only, Stephen. That would be tremendous. What I could do with that. But no, obviously we're not in that position. But we're not massively different in that we have 3 million people in Greater Manchester. But obviously, Scotland's in a very different situation with its geography, etc. We're currently getting around £1.5 billion through devolved funding streams from Whitehall. But they're kind of administered by every different Whitehall department. And what we're going towards here is a consolidated settlement. So I would expect it will land somewhere between £1.5 and £2 billion to begin with. But the hope is that will build up over the years and we'll be able to get more for that money. So let me just give you one really tangible example. Currently, the railways, we want to bring 8 rail lines into our B network. And currently, they're funded via Whitehall, £100 million of subsidy to the operator. But when people use those lines, they don't get the benefit of using the bus and the tram after because they're not integrated with our B network. So when that money comes through us and those lines come into the B network, you get more passengers using them because they'll be able to come to Manchester Piccadilly and then get on a bus for free or a tram or whatever, because we're going to have an integrated system soon like London. And that's an example how public money goes further when you're spending it in a more integrated way. And that's the argument we're making in this spending settlement. And the logic is the more you route through this approach, this devolved single pot approach, the more value you will achieve for public expenditure.
That's on transport and the rail network, but actually the bigger plans from the Labour government are on home building targets. They would place a lot of emphasis on local authorities to plan for new mandatory house building targets. I mean, local government does not have the resources to match that. Do you need more relaxed rules around fiscal borrowing if you're making the case that Greater Manchester can deliver bang for buck if Westminster hands over some dosh? Do you also need more relaxed rules around borrowing so that you can, make that big building pledge come true?
You make a really good point. I think investing in all forms of housing, including social housing and council housing, is the smartest investment that the UK could make right now. I've called, following the Grenfell inquiry, for the UK to undergo something of a sea change in the way that it thinks about housing, follow the Finnish lead and go towards a housing first philosophy where you guarantee everybody, or you work towards a guarantee that everybody has a good, secure home. Because if you go down that path, the evidence is clear from Finland that you can save so much money in terms of crisis spending in the health service, in other public services, because of the lack of that foundation of a good home behind people. You know, people can't have a good life without a good home. You can't have good health. You can't hold down a job without a good home. Housing first actually is the way to sustainable public finances in the long run. So yes, I do want that freedom that you're calling about around borrowing. I want, much greater freedom. I'm ready. I've made a big offer to the government that Greater Manchester will build 75,000 of the 1.5 million that the government is committed to in this Parliament, new homes. We will go further and we will do the 75,000. But I would plead with them to say, let's do that on the housing first principle, where you recognise that the market alone doesn't solve the country's housing problems. You have to build homes of all types in all places. But in giving everybody a good home, you're setting people up for success in life. And therefore, you're creating the conditions where you can reduce crisis spending in particularly the health service, but other public services as well down the line. So this is a big argument that I'm putting forward. We do need a sea change in the way we think about housing in this country. And if you look at Finland and what they've achieved, the evidence is all there.
Yeah, I will just make one point as a rebuttal that Finland obviously is a much smaller economy versus the UK, something like 43rd, 45th in the world versus UK. But I think it's a very interesting point you make.
I don't think it's a rebuttal, though. I think it's a fair point, but I don't think it kind of undermines the argument that I'm making, because Finland had a huge problem with homelessness in the early 80s, and they are the only country, I think, in the developed world that has significantly reduced homelessness, and in doing what it's done in terms of investing in housing, has reduced public expenditure on other services. So, you're right; it is only 5 million. But I think the model still holds, even in a country of 60 million or more. Housing is the most fundamental thing that people need. And if you've got the foundation of a good home, the chances are you'll be able then to hold down a job, you'll have better health, your kids will get a better education. I think the UK, the US has been thinking in the wrong way about housing for many years. You see the crisis on the streets here, but also in the US as well. The homelessness crisis leads to chaotic public spending, crisis spending, and actually spending that doesn't achieve the right results for people. What's the point in somebody, receiving expensive treatment in a hospital only to go home to a house full of damp and mold? It doesn't make sense.
Andy Burnham, Mayor of Greater Manchester, thank you very much for joining us. That's it from us for today. If you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe and give it 5 stars so other people can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or wherever you listen. Now, this episode was produced by Tiwa Adebayo. Our audio engineer was Sean Guastamakia. I'm Caroline Hepker. And I'm Stephen Carroll. We'll be back with more tomorrow. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg UK Politics. Listen weekdays at noon on DAB Digital Radio in London.